Welcome. This is a training on how to assess your current state of capacity in your organization, and we're going to use what's called the life cycles model. I became familiar with life cycles model and the work of Susan Kinney-Stevens about 3 years ago. And it's one of those models that is deceptively simple because it is so applicable, and it can be so powerful in communicating to the people in your organization, to your staff team, to your board team, to communicating to volunteers, and then also to communicating to funders and then other nonprofits that you might want as collaborative partners. Because it is so simple, it's quick to kind of teach and get on the same page with other folks. And so it's a great tool to use. I spent 2 years ago, I spent a year in depth studying it with a group of 18 people that Susan Kinney-Stevens led through the process of learning about the life cycles model and different ways to use it to help organizations. And so dyed in the wool, as they say, a true believer. So let me tell you what to expect between now and noon. First of all, I have a PowerPoint presentation where we're going to start with an introduction to the life cycles model and to capacity assessment and determining stages of your nonprofit and where your nonprofit is at a certain point. After a PowerPoint, I think everybody deserves a break. And so we'll do that. We'll take a short, probably about 10-minute break and let everybody stretch their legs and turn off their cameras so that you can take care of whatever you need to take care of. And then after the break, we're going to actually get into applying what we learned before the break to our own organizations. And so we're going to take time to use the tools that I sent you both as an attachment to the email where you got this Zoom link. And for those of you who have already received your books, the papers that we had in hard copy within the books. And so we're going to use those tools as our individual organizations, and then we'll share out as we feel comfortable. So it enhances our learning to hear about where other people are placed and the thought process that other people have gone through. And then we'll end our time together with a discussion about the possibilities for using this information. And so how we might take what we discovered about our organization today and the new terminology that we have, and how we might use that with whatever's coming up next for you, whether it's a grant request or a board meeting or like I said, a collaborative partnership. And so we can use this terminology and this knowledge about our own organization and where we want to go in lots of different ways. Throughout the meeting and the PowerPoint, if you have questions, I'm going to ask you to put those in the chat. Hillary's going to watch the chat and she's going to suss out when is a good time to interrupt Amy or be able to answer your questions in the chat. And so we'll just handle it that way. And thank you to Hillary for doing so. Okay, any questions before we get started on that? Great. I'm going to bring up my PowerPoint. Which screen are you seeing? Showing me.
We're seeing the one with the next slide off to the right-hand side. There you go.
Okay, great. Thank you. So here we go. So the Nonprofit Lifecycles Institute is the organization started by Susan Kinney-Stevens, the author of the book of Nonprofit Lifecycles. And this tool and this information has taken on a life of its own. So there is an institute. You can become an individual member if you want to. You can become an organizational member if you want to. I am certified to teach and to consult using the model through that institute. And kind of already hit on that. We already did this. Look at us moving right along. And one of the things, the goal of the Institute and the goal of Nonprofit Lifecycles is to create this community of nonprofits, foundations, consultants, this ecosystem, so to speak, where everybody understands this simple model so that we can build a culture of capacity and resilience in the nonprofit sector. And it is our strong belief that if nonprofits are strong, then communities are strong, because the nonprofits are doing the work that is needed in the communities. So the Nonprofit Lifecycles Institute work is done locally. So that's the model, is to work locally with funders through trained consultants and trainers, which, hello, here I am, developing a series of ecosystems across North America to reinforce, again, that culture of capacity, where nonprofits, funders, and consultants work together to say, we want our nonprofits to be stronger rather than have any kind of limited economic or other view of the nonprofit sector. So we're going to use this model from here on out to talk to each other and to understand each other. And don't be afraid to say that to folks. I have found that people in all parts of philanthropy and the nonprofit sector, and even there are life cycles of for-profit businesses, they understand this language and they're comfortable with it because it makes sense. It's non-judgmental. You'll see there in bullet point number 2, there is no judgment. Just because an organization is in startup, or maybe is in turnaround, or maybe is in decline, when we start to look at the stages, there's no judgment with that. It is just, you are where you are. And now that we know that, we can start to decide what the priorities are and what to do about it. Because we understand that there's a normal, natural progression that organizations go through. Just like humans, and that's what we call it, life cycles. Just like humans in our lifetime, we have stages that come naturally. So do organizations. And in this particular case, so do nonprofit organizations. And so there was a time in my life when I was a toddler, and I think I probably looked and acted and differently than I do now, I hope. And I needed different things. There were different priorities for taking care of me. And then when I was a teenager, I was different than that, but I was still different than I am now. And so there were different, again, needs, ways to take care of me, and things to understand what I needed to move on to the next stage in my life so that I didn't get stuck in teenager mode, thank goodness. So the normal, natural progression that a person goes through is kind of mirrored in a normal, natural progression that an organization goes through. Another fundamental of this life cycles philosophy is the accepting and respecting of founders. I have found in my career, and in fact, I think I've been guilty of it before, sometimes founders get an eye roll, like, because they won't let go, or they're hanging on to the past, or they're sometimes board members or leadership feels like the founders can be holding the organization back. And whether that's true or not, we need to have a healthy respect for the founders of nonprofit organizations. They are a special group of people. And we've built into this model a healthy acceptance and respecting of those founders, and some tools for assessing where the founder is in their understanding of the organization and what they need to leave a legacy in a way that lets the organization thrive and grow with or without them. It's also a good guide for boards. It's a great guide for planning, and it's a great guide for hiring. So what we see in different life cycle stages is different leadership is needed. And just like I used the example of when I was a toddler, my mom had to be a certain kind of mom, right? She probably felt like she was running around chasing me, had to be a very active mom. When I was a teenager, maybe she needed to be a different kind of mom, maybe still active, but in a different way. And so what we learn is that the same thing happens as far as leadership or planning for nonprofit organizations. When an organization is in the startup phase, it takes a lot of energy, right? Especially from those probably fairly new board and those people that are leading that organization. And it takes a certain type of, if we're even at startup phase calling it this, executive director or CEO of that organization. So it can be, this life cycle model can be informative to how we plan for the next stage or for while we're still in this stage. It can also be informative to the kind of leader we need to hire, the kind of board that we need to recruit, and how we're going to manage the organization. Also, this model is based on being honest with ourselves and others. And that's one of the reasons why I said, yes, we are recording the session and you're going to be happy we did, because you may want to go back and look at it when I send it to you afterward. But we're going to have Vegas rules, right? You may say, oh, I've identified a real challenge in our organization, or even though there is no judgment, it can sometimes be hard to say, I think my organization's in decline, or we're so late in maturity that we're about to go in decline, that kind of thing. So just be honest with ourselves and others, remembering that there's no judgment. The nice thing about understanding that this is a normal, natural progression is, again, going to go back to the life cycle of an individual. I bet I drove my mom nuts when I was 2.5, but she knew that I would not be in that stage forever. And so just the same with your organization is there are probably parts of each life cycle stage that drive people crazy and that maybe seem undesirable, but it's all a stage and it's all a phase, and there's a way to plan out of it, and there's a way to grow out of it and phase out of it. And the book that I have sent you, the yellow pages that are in the middle of that book, they kind of describe your stage. And then when it's almost like a cheat sheet, because then you can go look at the next stage and you can say, oh, so those would be the things that I would have, or the challenges. And plus it gives you the considerations for advancing in each stage. So being honest with ourselves and with others. And then finally, and I know I've said this before, it's a way to work with funders. It's a way to work with consultants. I may have forgotten to mention, because I was mentioning collaborative partners and funders and different people and different teams that you have in your organization, but consultants as well. There is a network of life cycles trained nonprofit consultants throughout North America, of which I'm a part, so I'm aware of them and can always connect you to one if you would like to work with somebody. But these are folks that understand this whole slide. They know that this is a valuable tool to use in consulting with your organization. They will not pass judgment on your organization. They understand that natural progression and how, if you say you're ready to go to that next stage, what are the pieces that you put into place for that growth and development. They'll respect a founder if there's some sort of intervention needed or planning needed to get a founder to leave their legacy. And also they can help with board training, with hiring of executives, and really have those tough conversations where they can help you be honest with yourself and others. And so if you find yourself in a position where you want to hire a consultant, one of the things I might recommend is looking for a consultant that has had some of this life cycles training. They don't have to have had a lot just to understand the model, as you'll see. So the benefits of thinking this way. Why are we using the life cycles model? Why is Amy, really drank the Kool-Aid, didn't she? You're like, wow, she loves this model and she really wants to teach it. And one of the reasons is because you understand and you describe where you are right now. And I believe fundamentally that if you do not know and assess and agree with the team that you're working with, this is where we are right now, then your planning is going to be possibly faulty, because it is from where you are that you need to grow or change or develop, or whatever that word is for you, invest. And so the benefit of this is the stage that you go through at the very beginning of the process, which is an assessment of our current capacity and our current life cycle stage. The other benefit of this is, if you can write a book and teach life cycles to all over the world, then there's nothing special about where you are. Now, I don't mean that there's nothing special about your nonprofit, because I actually quite the opposite, believe each and every nonprofit and their mission and their beneficiaries that they serve. I believe there's a lot that's special about that. That's why I'm in the sector. But what it shows us is that you're normal. You're not alone. We don't ever look at a toddler and go, oh my gosh, that person, why do they keep throwing things and sticking things in their mouth? Well, we know it's normal, right? And so if we could take a step back from our organizations and say, oh, why does this keep happening? And then you go, oh, because it's normal for this life cycle stage. And if we want that to change, we're going to have to X, Y, Z. Also, as I've mentioned before, it's a way to talk to funders, to your board, to your staff, honestly, about where we are and what we need and what is next. And I find that, in an ideal world, your board is very aware of where you are and what you need next, and they're providing you with all the moral and financial and actionable support that you need to do so as an executive director. That doesn't always happen. And so it's nice to have something that's a little quicker and a little easier and a little a quicker way to communicate, this is where we are, this is what we need. And the nice thing is, if board, staff, funders want to know more, it's an accessible tool. You can hand them that book, you can show them this recording, you could do something to get them on board real quick. And then it depersonalizes structural weakness. A lot of times when an organization isn't where it wants to be, or it's having trouble, let's use the teenager phase of life, it's easy to point fingers. Well, my board just won't. And the board is like, well, we've told our executive director X, and it's easy to personalize things. It's easy to point blame. But if we step back and we say, no, this is just with no judgment, this is where we are, this is our life cycle stage, and this is what we need to do to build capacity or to move on to our chosen life cycle stage, which might be the next one, then it's not a personal thing. It's just a normal, natural thing. Just like even if we want to, we don't blame teenagers for being teenagers. We say, we're teenagers. So again, the objective is to make your nonprofit strong so that we can make your community strong. And we want to make sure that you realize that capacity occurs in stages. It doesn't happen overnight, and it's not supposed to happen overnight. If you tried to take an organization that you started last week to maturity right away, if you possibly had the money and energy to do that, I can't imagine how that would possibly progress. Now, there's not a set, differently than humans, there's not a set age. It's not, you spend 6 months in startup, you spend 6 months in growth. It's not like that. There are organizations out there that are 30 years old. In fact, I've worked with the O'Neill Center, and I think right now you all are in a growth phase and you've assessed it. And I think that you might be in growth right now. So it's not about how old the organization is. It's about what pieces of the organization are in place, right? And we've even experienced humans with developmental delays where it's not about how old they are. They're still perhaps at a different developmental stage than their age. And that happens with organizations as well. Also, by understanding and using the life cycles approach, you understand what a good fit for you would be, maybe in a partner, maybe in a funder, maybe in a consultant. So there are consultants who say, do not ever, ever, ever give me an organization that is mature. And others that say, I don't like startups. I refer out when I get a startup. There are organizations you might want to work with that might be in certain phases, and you think, okay, now how, if they're in that phase and I'm in this phase, how are we going to work together? Or if we're in the same, or do we have too many issues in common that may or may not be negative? And therefore, knowing that, you can hit those head on and address them when you go to make your partnerships. So let's talk about capacity. Questions up until now? Okay, so capacity matters, all right? We can't just run programs, and not have capacity in the other important areas of the organization. And this table model is so super simple. It's so easy to share with people, and it's so easy to quickly understand what we mean by capacity and by the support for programs and the mission by using the table legs model. So here's our mission. Here's what we want the world to see, right? It's the result. It's what we want. It's what we work toward. This is beautiful. How do we get there? What are we doing? How are we supporting that mission? Is through programs, right? That's what we're doing all day, every day. Underneath those programs, we got some pretty important table legs. So this is our tabletop, right? This is our beautiful pot of flowers. Our table legs are management. Some people call this people, the people table leg. So this is your staff, your CEO, the people in your organization. We also have governance. You can call this the board table leg, right? And the overview or oversight of the organization. We have the financial resources. Some people will call this one the business model. Some people have called this the money leg, right? How we get our money, where we get our money, how much money we have. And this is the systems table leg. So this is where, do we have IT support? Do we have HR process? Do we have what we need as far as procedures, processes, and supportive systems to support these programs? So we've got the people that are doing the work, and we could throw volunteers in here as well. This is the board and the oversight of the organization, the business model, the money, the financial resources of the organization, and the systems and the organization, the policies, the procedures, the how we do things. Some policies fall here. This is the how and the tools that we have to do our systems. So pretty simple, but pretty powerful is, in order to achieve our mission, we're going to do these programs, and those programs need solid governance. They need solid management. We need financial resources and administrative systems to run those programs. And without them, we imagine if these legs are short, right? Or if they're lopsided. Questions about the capacity model? So this is what we mean when we say nonprofit capacity, is that you're running a nonprofit that has table legs that support its tabletop in a way that's appropriate to where you are in your life cycle stage. So what's inside of those legs, how big or strong those legs are, that's probably dependent on where you are in your life cycle stage. One of the goals is alignment, right? So that our table isn't lopsided and our mission isn't falling off of one side because we've got a short leg. But that's why you assess where you are. Because if you determine you have a short leg, now we know what we need a grant for, or what we need to tell our board we need to prioritize, or what we need a partner, collaborative partner for, or consultant for. And I mentioned the ecosystem earlier. Again, nonprofits, funders, consultants, all with a view to capacity, right? And so a lot of times you'll find people that are focused on programs. And sometimes you find people that are focused on money or on systems, right? And so it's important to be able to recognize in someone else's language what they're focused on so that you can see what the right fit for you is. But understanding that the whole point is to build the capacity of your organization. Because by building the capacity of your organization, you're building your table legs, right? Capacity, that table. By building those table legs up under those programs, you're supporting your mission. And your mission is what's going to make that community stronger. So it's that cause and effect chain. Capacity costs money. And this is a place where I see the funders and the boards and the organizations, and even some of the individual donors, because you do have donors that are savvy enough to talk this language with you. Even individual donors coming around to understanding capacity costs money. And so I can't as a funder or as a funding, as philanthropy in general, I can't just say I'm just funding programs. Because if we got a bunch of organizations that are just tabletops, we're on the floor and we're going to stay on the floor. We have to build the table legs. And it's not free to build table legs. And it's not always visible to build table legs. It's not always fun or heartwarming or able to take a picture of it and put it on social media to build table legs. It costs to build table legs. It costs time and it costs money and it costs effort and teamwork. But it's worth it because you're putting table legs under those programs to meet that mission. And so that's what we're trying to communicate to funders and consultants and collaborative partners. So we'd like to see more operating support, because an operating support grant would probably be a capacity building grant. In fact, we love it when we see funders say that they provide capacity building grants. And so one of the thing I want every single one of you that are on this webinar or workshop, virtual workshop today to do is put in your vocabulary right now from here on out, capacity building grant funds. Like write it down and use that as terminology now. You may not see it, you may not see RFPs for it a lot, but it's starting to happen. And it's something that I would encourage you to ask about and to ask for, capacity building grant funds. Because we need to have funders that are savvy enough that they know that if they want to see those strong communities, which is usually their objective, that they're going to have to support the legs of those tables. We also need to get out of this culture of inadequacy where, well, we're a nonprofit, so, we just have to reuse our paper clips and we have to, use both sides of the Post-it note. That's okay. It's okay to be frugal, but it's not okay to not pay our people. If we can, we should, right? That's one of our table legs, is our people. It's not okay to just say, well, I'm just a nonprofit, so, right? If your laptop is duct taped together, then maybe that's just is how it is. but that falls under systems, right? That might be something that we need to address with a capacity building grant. And so I also would like everybody on the virtual workshop today to stop accepting inadequacy because we're a nonprofit. Because what you really are is an organization that is critical to the lives of many. And you are probably a smarter, better organized, more, if I can use a crazy word like important individual than a lot of people that are working in the for-profit sector that have the brand new computer or do get the professional development every year. And so start to think in terms of not being disgruntled with where you are as a nonprofit, but what are the things that we could stop having these limiting beliefs about and start building our organization, building these table legs, building these relationships, starting to have the things that we need to do our job and to do our job better. And the other thing that we need to address is overhead as a negative word versus administrative costs as a table leg, right? It costs money to have good people, and it costs money to have space and equipment and software. And these are things that you need to run your organization more than likely. And so being able to not feel guilty about that, not call it overhead, but to understand that it's an administrative cost and that you need it to support your programs to then carry out your mission. Back to the table metaphor. So capacity costs are the costs that are necessary to achieve organizational competence, right? Part of organizational competence, remember the management leg that I called the people leg, is the people. And people have to be taken care of. A lot of times in the nonprofit sector, we can't pay as much salary or benefits as they might pay in the for-profit sector. Well, okay, great. So we got some heartwarming and some purpose, some mission-driven people, super, but let's not burn them out. Let's find ways to treat them or to provide things for them. Maybe they're low cost or no cost, but that allow for them to carry on and to stay important parts of the organization so we can keep that table leg strong. A lot of turnover does not make for a strong management table leg either. I already talked a lot and gave a lot of examples about capacity occurring in stages. And so just when we say stage, life cycle stage, know that we're talking about a developmental period, right? So I use toddler and teenager. And those are developmental periods that have patterns of behavior that every single one of you, I know when I said toddler, you got a picture in your head. You saw a toddler and you saw behavior. And when I say teenager, you can get a picture of a teenager in your head and you see behavior, even if it is just how that person at that stage in life is carrying themselves or interacting with the world. And that is true of your nonprofit organization. It's a developmental period where you have characteristic patterns of what's happening in your organization. There's certain behaviors of your board, of your management that are evidenced, and certain capacities become established as well in those stages. So by being in a stage, by knowing where you are in a stage, you know which capacities, which pieces of which table legs you should be strengthening at the moment so that you can move on to the next. Or some people, for example, growth is a stage some organizations choose to stay in. Maturity is also a stage that some organizations will choose to stay in. And so knowing what the key characteristics of that developmental stage for your organization are, help you make wise choices about whether or not you're going to stay in that different stage and how to go about doing it. So there's a lot of temptation with life cycles to see it as this timeline or this definitive, because it has that bump in the middle, kind of this rise to the top, and to put some things into the model that aren't there. And so let me warn you about a few things. There are no exact number of life cycle stages. We're going to talk about an exact number, but within each, there you could put a whole bunch of different little dots. In fact, you'll find me saying sometimes late growth to early maturity, or this organization is in a turnaround, but they're termed. And so you'll hear me add sometimes extra words to the life cycle stage because it's not neat and clean, right? Just like your teenager someday is not just the same teenager at 15 that they were at 13. And so there are shades of difference. And so there's really not an exact number. We've just got some major categories. Also, this is diagnostic, not deterministic. And so all we're going to do is determine where we are now. We're not saying, oh, and there you are. That's you. We're saying, there you are now. And now what do you want to do with that information? What's next for you? What are the priorities of this organization? Where does the money need to be spent? What are we going to apply for grants for? Where do we need to look for partners? Do we need to bring in a consultant on any of that? It's not necessarily sequential or evolutionary. That one's super hard to get when you look at the graphic, because the graphic is helpful, but it makes our brains want to feel like, oh, we just go through these stages nice and neatly in this, every couple years, we're going to be in a different stage. And that's not necessarily true for organizations. And we'll see why as we look at some of the details. It's not age or size dependent. So there are organizations that have one paid staffer that might be in maturity. And there are organizations that have 30 employees that might be in startup or growth. And so it's not, well, we've been around 30 years and we've got 10 staff. So we are obviously, it's not that. That's why you have the book. And that's why you have those yellow pages that I like to call the cheat sheets, the gold pages in the middle of the book, is it's characteristics of the organization and the different parts of the organization, the tabletop, the table legs, that let us know where the organization is, not how long the organization has been around, not how many employees or volunteers it has, not how many programs that it has. Also, it's holistic. So when we talk about the organization as a whole, we can say this organization, it appears to be in the growth stage. We feel like this organization is just solidly, let's say, firmly middle, it's right in the growth stage. I can also say, however, I can apply stage-based wisdom to any piece of that organization. So I can take a look at the board and I can say, but our board is really stone startup. When I look at the qualities or traits of that board, they're not in growth yet. And vice versa, with all the different table legs and all the different parts of the organization. In fact, some organizations have chosen to take each and every program and say, this program is in startup, this program is in maturity, and start to look at individual programs and where those programs are in their life cycle stages when they get further down the road of using the model, so that they can start to decide what's next for the program itself. And then finally, one of the goals of life cycles is alignment. It will be much more beneficial to the organization, comfortable to work in or for the organization if that organization is in alignment. If you are in an organization that has a super strong table leg in one area and short, weak, crumbled, or lack of table legs in other areas or other table legs, it won't feel right. It's time to work on those other areas. And that happens because there are organizations who end up with somebody who is an expert on board development. And so they spend all their time on that governance table leg, and oh my goodness, you have a wonderful board. Now you don't have any administrative systems. And you can't carry on. You're not going to go to the next stage in your development as an organization if you don't. Okay. If the goal is to carry on, no judgment. Okay, so here are the stages. Idea. You know what I think the world needs? This is how nonprofits start. I love it when people come into my office with an idea for a new nonprofit. Those are the most passionate, caring, selfless individuals, right? They're usually called founders at some point. I have an idea. Usually this idea comes from a lived experience or being close to a lived experience and or just seeing an opportunity. Okay, so there's the idea stage. A startup, right? We're going to do it. We're going to get this idea off the ground. We're going to go a little deeper into these in a minute. Growth, we're going to start building table legs, right? We're going to get the legs under this thing and really have programs. Maturity, we've hit our stride. People know who we are. They know what we're doing. They're using our services. We've got this. Decline, whoops. We focused on how we do things instead of who we were doing them for. It's kind of one way to look at that. Turnaround, bootstrap it. We got to go back. We've got to rework some things because we let some things fester. And terminal, I sometimes call it sunsetting, but there are organizations who have a limited lifespan and that choose to sunset, I have known founders who said, this organization, when I go away, will go away. I don't want it or need it to carry on after me. I'm not going to build it like that. There are other reasons that organizations would sunset. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. It can be, but it's a unique life cycle stage that needs to be handled well. We had an organization in my community that got into the terminal phase, and the whole community was surprised because when they were in decline, they never communicated it. They never asked for help. They didn't reach out. They didn't tell anybody. It was like the best kept secret. Big organization serving a lot of people. And they just let themselves dwindle. They didn't know what to do about it. They didn't know who to reach out to. And so when they reached the terminal stage, everyone was surprised and they were embarrassed and they didn't communicate well when they did their sunsetting. And so then what happened was there were people that they were serving that had no place to go. There were donors that didn't even know they couldn't write a check this year. They didn't communicate, right? So every stage, including terminal, has things that you need to do, has a way that you handle it to do it right, to meet the needs of your beneficiaries, to pay respect to your mission and to those people that you serve. Questions about life cycle stages. Like I said, we're going to go into each one in detail in a minute, but if there's a kind of a big picture question about anything we've talked about so far, I'd be happy to hear it. Okay, so this is what, if you were going to fill out that little chart, which I sent everybody one, if you were going to fill out that little chart with where you thought you were in your capacity, This would be an example of a chart of an organization that was pretty much in alignment. Most of their dots, most of their parts of their organization are somewhere in the growth stage. And if I was this organization, I might say, do we want to focus on governance in our next quarter or next strategic plan? Because it looks like they might need to come up. Or maybe administrative systems. Give me some specifics on why that one's a little behind. A lot of times you see programs out in front. That happens a lot, right? Because that's what we do. We do programs to support our mission. So this is capacity and alignment. This is not a bad picture. This is capacity out of alignment. An organization that looks like this has, so look at those programs, right? Like I said, you see programs there a lot. Management, people. So what this tells me about this organization is you've got some good people in your organization working really hard to make great programs. And you need your needs, your capacity building needs at this stage to come into alignment are to spend some time with your board. We'd have to drill down into what made board come out of startup stage, to take a look at your business model, your money, where you're getting your money and how much money you have and what you do with it. Look at your financial resources and figure out what we might need to do to come up to bring that table leg up, and your administrative systems. So a chart that would be out of alignment, especially one that would be this blatantly out of alignment, kind of just points us right in the direction of where we need to focus our money and energy next. So even though our goal is alignment, there's no shame, there's no judgment. That just got us an easy way to communicate priorities, right? And we haven't even talked in detail about the life cycle stages yet. I don't know how many of you have read the book, but right there, you slide that across the table in front of somebody and they can kind of get it, having never heard any of it. And so that's one of the reasons why we say it's such a great way to communicate where you are when you start to talk about potential consultants, funders, collaborators, et cetera. What we sometimes call this is the skier getting ahead of his skis. Imagine if for anybody who snow skis, or I guess water skis, if these are your skis and this is your body, it won't be long. You're not going to be on your feet for very long, right? So don't let your skier get ahead of your skis. Don't let your programs get too far out there because they need support. So that means we need to build capacity. Capacity building requires practical solutions grounded in solid diagnosis to produce organizations that are strong, durable, and capable. This one, I would like to put this in front of every funder and every board member ever. This quote, right? That we need, this is why we need to build capacity. But also in front of consultants, because of this practical solution. Too many trainers, consultants, workshops that are given for nonprofits that claim that they're to help nonprofits build capacity are proposing best practices. And I am going to assert that my local food bank that is in growth stage of its organization does not have the same solutions on the table as my local Red Cross that is in late maturity. And that even if those organizations were in the same life cycle stage, there are considerations specific to that organization that would make the solutions not the same. And so one of the things that we need to think about when we think about capacity building in our organizations is what would work for us. Because based on what people we have, what strengths they have, what financial resources we have, what connections we have, what leverage we have in our communities, those vary organization to organization. That's not a life cycle stage thing. That is an organization thing. And so when I say practical solutions, that means something that it feels like that you can do. Not, oh my gosh, I wish, right? So there's this big software program for nonprofits called Salesforce. And if we just had that, not necessarily, right? Maybe there's only one application on that right now that is good for your organization. And maybe you can handle it with Excel. So practical solutions that will work for your organization. So we're talking about next practices, not best practices. What would be next? What would be moving forward for you that would build strength in that table leg? That's the discussion to be having with your staff, with your board, with your consultant, and with your funder. What's next for us? Okay, temptation for some consultants, some funders, some board members that have read, blah, blah, well, if we just had, I used Salesforce as an example. If we just had Salesforce, well, no, we don't even have the capacity in the, that's an administrative system. We don't have the capacity in the people table leg to do Salesforce. Why would you think that that would be our next best thing to do? So making sure that the solutions that come out of this are practical, that is capacity building. It's taken the next step. Okay, someday you might get down there, but right now it's just the next step. And they're grounded in solid diagnosis, meaning we spent time looking at our organization. We used the life cycles model. We talked about each table leg, and we know this is where we are right now. And so that's how we can determine what would be a practical next step. Because we want to be strong, durable, and capable. This is my least favorite slide. I feel like by the time we get here, it's so crystal, it's kind of obvious, but the capacity is you want to have the means to do the performance, which you'll measure, and then you'll be effective and you'll be able to demonstrate impact, right? And so it's that continuum. And if we're still back here building capacity, which we probably always are, we need to make sure that's strong and that we determine what are our performance measures going to be, how are we going to show impact, right? And so as we build this, how are these things going to change? So let's talk about life cycle stages. Now, these slides are quick synopsis of the life cycle stages, just to give you an idea or a feeling. You've got the book, you've got the gold pages in the middle of the book, and so you can dive deeper into this. But what I just want you to have now is these aha moments of, oh my gosh, that's my organization, or yep, I've worked in that organization before, so that you start to relate to the different stages. And then also sometimes this is going to help you determine next steps by looking at what those challenges are, and probably dispel a little bit of judgment, I hope. So stage one is idea, right? I already said somebody has a great idea. Somebody probably has a huge heart and lived experience and a great idea. There's a perceived community need that sparks a founding idea or a vision of what could be and what should be. People need X. Characteristics of an organization that is in idea stage. Probably you can't even use the word organization. Programs are not yet defined. There's only this intense personal mandate to fill a societal gap. People need this, right? Kids in this area are not, they don't all have the shoes that they need. to play sports and go to the career center. And so we want to provide them. I'm part of an organization that does that. So I'll use that as an example. Management. Again, call this people if you want to. Originators of the idea are believable, action-oriented people with a commitment to that purpose, right? It's somebody who says, I had cancer and I know that this is what people who are going through that need, right? Or whatever that particular passion, mission is. Governance or board. There's no board yet. It's an idea, right? So now there may be a small team of people who say, yeah, we do need that and I'll work toward it, but I wouldn't call them organized into a board. Resources. There usually aren't any. There's usually sweat equity. And this is when you start to rely on what you've seen before. Maybe we have a spaghetti dinner. Should we go to a GoFundMe? What should we do first? Sweat equity is this, and self-funding are devices like that people use. Sometimes there's an angel investor. Now, in my part of the country, it doesn't happen very often. We don't have the uber wealthy that are looking for projects to put their money, but they are in other parts of the world, and West Virginia Nonprofit Association can connect you to some software that might connect you to grants that could possibly get some angel funds. Systems, there's not usually any systems of any kind formally, but people give in kind. So I might say, hey, I have a color copier at my office and I'm allowed to print. So I'll print the flyers. And somebody else says, well, I have a big cooler, so I'll bring the drinks. You know, whatever it is, people are giving in kind. There's not really resources or systems yet. So here are the challenges if somebody's in the idea stage. Did you identify an unmet need? Very rarely. It's so hard because people are so passionate. Very rarely do they say, is there somebody else already doing this? Or doing it close enough to it that we could work together? That doesn't usually happen, but it should. Developing a mission and vision, slowing down, taking a moment with a piece of paper or a whiteboard and saying, what are we really trying to accomplish? What do we want the world to look like if this works? Mobilizing the support of others, always a challenge, right? To ask people to give their time, money, effort, something other than their cooler and their printer to be part of your effort. And converting that idea into action. So if we were at an idea stage and we were communicating with a funder or with a partner, then these are the things that we would ask for help on so that we could move forward. Questions or comments about the idea stage? Startup stage. This is the beginning stage of operations. Energy and passion are at their highest level. This is so exciting. We're actually doing it, but systems generally lag far behind. So we typically just have a tabletop, right? Programs are simple, they're experimental, and they generally have more breadth than depth. So we're trying things, okay? The leader's a spark plug, seems to have endless energy sometimes because they think that they can and need to do it all themselves. It's very typical of a founder at that stage. Members almost always have a personal connection. Members of the board, I'm sorry. If you start to form a board at this point, this is when people go, oh yeah, if we're gonna be a nonprofit, we need a board. And members of that board usually have a personal connection to the founder or to the mission or both. There's a joke amongst grant reviewers that, you know, a lot of times in grants, you have to put the names and addresses of your board members. And so one of the ways that they can detect if you are in startup phase is that you either all have the same last name or you all live on the same street. Resources, usually budget is low, bootstrap operation, again, unless there was a major grant to give seed money. And financial and administrative systems are generally weak and maybe outsourced. In other words, somebody has just opened a checking account and they put their name and their husband's name or best friend's name on it, and they're just running it the best they can, straight up. So what are the challenges when you're in a startup? Many, right? Many various challenges. The key ones are sharing the vision and organizational responsibility with staff, board, and constituencies. In other words, communicating what we're trying to do here. Hiring versatile staff. And notice it says versatile. So remember earlier when I asserted that the life cycles model was a tool that could be used for hiring? It can be. And this is one of the ways you can do it. If you recognize that your organization is in the startup phase, you can go, wait, I got people that are going to have to wear many hats. That's one of the things I want to interview for. I need versatile staff. I don't need specialists. I love that so-and-so is tried and true in accounting, but I'm going to need them to do some other stuff too. So I need to hire somebody who has many talents. Another challenge is leveraging sweat equity into outside support. So we've got this core group. We need to start to bring in others. And how can we do that in an intentional way? Big challenge. This might always be a challenge. It's definitely a challenge in startup stage. But it's a lot of people with the heart for nonprofits, it's always a challenge, and that's knowing when to say no. Startup organizations start to communicate their ideas and their missions, and then somebody goes, well, yeah, and you know what else you should do? And you know what else you should do? And could you come talk to my group? And don't you think you should have a spaghetti dinner? And it can just snowball, and knowing when to say no and how to start to put some rails on the thing during startup stage is difficult. And then living within financial means. A lot of times we find this spark plug or this small group of board members contributing to the bottom line and giving of their own funds and to make things start and to make things work. Very typical. Stage 3 is growth. Program opportunity and service demand exceed current systems and structural capacities. Because you might be saying, what systems and what capacity, right? We're just getting off the ground here, okay? Now it's time to grow. So programmatically, what does it look like? Your organization understands and defines your methods and approach that separate its programmings from others. So yeah, there are other places that feed kids, but this is how we do it. Management. The organization is led by people who see infinite potential for services. Again, back to hiring. If we're going to hire a CEO in growth stage and we interview somebody who says, those are nice programs, we could run those. That might not be the growth stage per CEO, because the growth stage CEO probably is going, oh, yes, I could see someday having a blankety blank and a blankety blank, right? Because that is more of a growth stage mindset. The board structure begins to appear. So all of a sudden we're having regular meetings because we have a lot to talk about. Maybe we've even assigned the executive committee or some other committees, but we start to get some structure. Resources, more sources of income create greater accounting and compliance complexities. So this is where we have mixed blessings, right? We're starting to have programs, we're starting to get people and money involved, and we're getting bigger. And by getting bigger, it means we need to support with systems, the things that we're doing, right? So current systems, never good to begin with, maybe non-existent, now have to be substantially improved. When we're in the growth stage, we need to make sure we start shoring up that table leg for sure, okay? Because we're gonna There are going to be people that are looking only at that tabletop. And if we don't have somebody or some group of people making sure that we have that systems table leg strong, then we're going to regret it later because we're going to be out of alignment. So what are the challenges? Too much to do in too little time. Again, that one might be universal in the nonprofit sector. Identifying your distinctive competence, right? Well, wait a second, doesn't so-and-so do the same thing? Well, yeah, but we do it with this slice of the population, or we use this type of programming that's evidence-based, right? Knowing what separates you from the pack of people in your subsector. Developing board ownership, really getting the board engaged. Formalizing organizational structure, right? We've all got many hats, but let's start to talk about job descriptions. Creating a program and strategic focus that doesn't trap creativity and vision. So every coin has a flip side. And so we're saying you need some structure, right? You need a little strategic vision of where you're going now, you're in growth stage. You need to have some systems in place. You need to have job descriptions or job assignments in place for different people. But let's not trap the creativity and the vision. And so we have to start in growth stage to walk that tightrope of we're focused on the organization, we're building table legs, but are we still in touch with the community? Are we still in touch with our beneficiaries? Do we know what's needed? Are we responsive? Are we creative? Are we excited about what we're doing? Also, being comfortable with change can be a challenge because in growth stage, if you're growing, if you're adding new programs, you're adding new services, you're adding new systems, you're adding new people to the board and to the staff, you got to be comfortable with change. And that's tough. And diversifying revenues and managing cash flow, right? We might now have a signature fundraiser. We might have a couple private individual donors. We may even have set up on our website a donate button. But we really need to look at that I called it the money table leg. But do we have a business model? Do we have ways that we make money that we can then budget for ways that we spend money? And is that diversified enough that as the world changes and progresses and we do as an organization, that we're still going to have a solid table leg in that area? This is one of the cautionary tales in growth stage is just about everybody in the world, you don't have to be in the nonprofit sector, remembers the Ice Bucket Challenge for the ALS organization. And my mom passed away of ALS in 1994. And so I was especially excited for that social media campaign and participated in it and followed up on the organization and how many funds they got, millions and millions and millions of dollars, and what they did with those funds. And what they did with those funds was just about collapse because the structure wasn't necessarily there to be able to handle that much money and that much attention and do it wisely. And so that was table legs out of alignment. They ended up with this big financial pedestal in the middle of their table, and then administrative systems, board governance, management were lacking. So it took them a while to catch back up. Life cycle stage 4 is maturity. Now, the temptation is to think this is where we want to be. But as we saw in growth, there's some really great things about growth. And I've seen organizations decide that they want to stay in growth. And so don't just make it without proper analysis of what's right for your organization. Don't make it a race to maturity. This is not necessarily a race to maturity. All right. Overview. In the maturity stage, a nonprofit has a reputation for providing steady, relevant, vital services to its community. And it operates with a solid organizational foundation and an overall sense of security. We're going to be here tomorrow. We're going to keep doing this work. So a reputation, people know about your organization, probably even the go-to, that when somebody says, oh, I've got this kid that needs, we go, I know exactly who to call. And we pick up the phone and call you. And there's a solid organizational foundation. There are table legs. There are 4 table legs under that. And you feel like you're going to stay in business for a while. So characteristics are programs that are well organized and results focused and in touch with community needs. Right? That is where you want to be. Management, executive leadership is 2nd or 3rd generation from the originators. If you still got a founder around at this point, you're probably out of alignment. Some founders are versatile enough that they can go through to maturity, but that's worth taking a look at and having a good conversation about when you do your honest assessment and your diagnosis. Your board is setting your direction. It's very policy oriented. It leaves the day-to-day management to the executive director. This group has been able to step back now. Back when they were the working board and they were serving spaghetti at the spaghetti dinner, they don't have to do that anymore. They're able to look at the big picture. They're able to look at the budget, the long-term plan, policies, and really provide governance, leadership, and strategic planning with the executive leadership of the organization and the CEO. Resources, your organization has multiple sources of income and is not dependent on just one source of funding. And that means even one type of source of funding. So even if it's just federal grants, there's a cautionary tale or 2 to be told about that. So having more than one source of funding is usually a good idea. You don't need to have every different kind. There are lots of different ways for nonprofits to get money, but you don't have to have every single one of them. But having more than one is definitely a sign of maturity and probably a long-term beneficial strategy. And the organization operates from an outlined course of action. In other words, you've got procedures in place. You've got a routine client process. You've got routine program cycles. You've got your board has a cycle. You have an HR process. All these systems are established. You know, your IT, you have some sort of IT support or plan. You know what you need. And those systems match what you need, what you're trying to accomplish with programming. But maturity is its own slippery slope because you need to remain client-centered. Here are some of the challenges. Not policy bound. So the temptation when an organization gets mature, the organization I told you about that declined without anybody knowing about it, this was one of those cases. They got big, they got mature, well-known throughout the community. Everybody thought they were doing great, and they just kept doing things the way they did it. Even when things about the community changed, they kept the same old programs. And so what happened is a decline in enrollment in those programs. They kept the same old board members who wanted to do the same old thing, the same old ways, instead of turning people off and bringing in fresh ideas. They kept the same CEO who just felt like she had arrived. It was all good. Don't worry, we got this. So remaining client-centered, really still staying responsive and in touch with the community and the clients that you serve. Keeping staff motivated around the mission rather than just doing the job. Because now we know how to do it. We've got these set programs, we've got these table legs, and it can be really easy to get focused on how we do things rather than what we do it for and why we do it and if it's the right way to do it. Another challenge, though, is at this stage, you could start to build endowment or reserves. Challenge is maintaining your edge in programmatic ways, cycling programs in and out based on relevancy. Because this is when the new whippersnapper over an idea stage is going to speak up and go, that organization is doing it, but they're not doing it well. So I'm going to start a new organization and do it better. Right? There's still competition in nonprofit sector as well. And becoming position rather than person dependent. So until now, we have had, you know, if you say XYZ job or program, yeah, that's Hillary's. That's our program director, right? Because we want to be on a solid foundation of, and then we have an HR process. If we need to promote Hillary to CEO, then we have a process to bring in another program director. So making sure that we're able to be nimble. That's maturity stage. Decline. Organization makes status quo decisions based on internal factors rather than external client needs. We're out of touch. If you're out of touch, you're going to be in decline. They result in diminished client status, insufficient current income to cover operating expenses, right? So organizations that always do what they always did with what they always had to who they always did it, this is that organization. May not realize it, but they are in decline. Programs are losing clients to others whose approach is more accessible or less expensive. Management feels organizational slippage. And usually what you find is that if you talk to the CEO, they're blaming external factors. If you talk to a CEO and that person is saying, oh, well, you know, well, let me say it, COVID, even though COVID is a legit challenge, but has no plan for anything or whatever the external factor is, you know, oh, we lost that one particular grant, whatever it is. If that's the mindset of the CEO, you're probably in decline. Governance, your board is unaware there's anything wrong. I've seen this in another organization as well, where the organization was in sharp decline, especially financially. And the CEO didn't want the board to know it because they were embarrassed. And so they made up this great Microsoft Word document that they could just put anything they wanted to in it and take to the board meeting, and just was a vase of roses every time. And it wasn't until the government and creditors, et cetera, started knocking at their door did the board have any idea that that organization was in decline. So that happens. They think things are running smoothly because they have pulled back and gotten comfortable and are not engaged and aren't asking the good and right questions. Budgets are fixed cost and expense heavy. And the income projections and all the budgeting is based on how we've always done it, how it used to be in years past, rather than what's current, what's fresh, what could we do differently. And systems, although developed, are often antiquated and physical space may be deteriorated, right? If you see an organization that can't afford to keep its physical space up and it's not doing anything about it by changing the physical space or raising funds or whatever it is, that organization might be in decline. Those are some key indicators. Challenges. If an organization is in decline, it needs to reconnect with the community need. It needs to discard anything that's duplicative or that adds no value, and it might hurt because you love that program. Probably you're the one that thought it up and did it for 20 years, but somebody else is doing it better now, or maybe it's not needed, or it's needed in a different way. Remember that policies, procedures, systems, and structure are no substitute for creativity and risk-taking. Back to the tightrope, right? Not saying this is how we do it. Okay, but it better make sense for our organization and for our constituents and for our community. Keeping the board actually informed and actually engaged. Raising enough operating income so that revenues are not drawn down for everyday, or reserves, I'm sorry, are not drawn down for everyday use. So back when we were in the maturity stage, hopefully we built some reserves. right? Ideally an endowment of some sort for some pieces of our program or for some parts of our staff. And if we get to the point where we have to start tapping into that we never meant to tap into, that's an indicator that we're probably in decline if it's happened on a repeated basis. And it's not an intentional decision to do so for a one-time thing. And then challenge is to examine the budget for top-heavy administrative expenses. Sometimes we end up people-heavy in this stage, or building heavy, or fee heavy, and need to take a look at what needs to happen. I'll tell you also in hiring, when an organization hits this next stage of turnaround, it is typical that the CEO or executive director that brought an organization through the decline phase would not be the right individual to handle the turnaround. It's not personal. That's a different mindset. It's a different personality. It's a different organizational culture and a different dynamic with the board and with the staff and with the donors in the community. Usually if you're going to come into turnaround phase, if you say, identify I'm in decline, and I say I'm going to go to turnaround and turn around, then I'm probably going to need a new executive director to do so. And maybe a new board president.
Amy, before you get into turnaround,
yeah.
Erin had a question in the chat.
Sure.
And so I'm hearing an echo. I apologize if everyone else is hearing that as well. So she asked, can decline happen quickly and unexpectedly, or is it always gradual?
It can happen quickly and unexpectedly. In fact, I worked with an organization this year, and I bet there were many that there wasn't decline, there was COVID. And so what they did was go into turnaround turned and say, it looked like these are the things that we need to, these are the challenges, right? These are the things we need to focus on. We didn't have a decline, we had a pandemic. And so if you find yourself assessing your organization and you are in, and you think we're in turnaround, but I didn't see a decline, that's very likely right now at this stage in the world. Any other questions? Thank you. That was a very good question. Okay, so turnaround. This is when you're at a critical juncture, right? This is kind of the fish or cut bait. What are we going to do? What do we have the energy for? What does the community need? Do we feel like that we can do this? There's probably been a loss of market share, been a loss of revenue. If an organization, though, says self-awareness, this is where we are, and we are determined to come back, then you really put together a plan to take decisive action to reverse what happened, to become relevant again, to become vital again. And like I said, maybe it wasn't that gradual decline. Maybe it was just that we went into a pandemic and we all had to go home for a while, and we had to do our programming completely different. Our systems went completely different. And now we need to pretend like we're in a turnaround, because we kind of are. Programs need to be reassessed and modified in light of current market needs and financial viability. It's going to feel like growth again. The people, you need a turnaround leader that's gutsy. You need somebody that's got the energy for it, right? If somebody's burnout, they're not your turnaround person. I'm sorry. Maybe they have another role in the organization. You need a clear sense of direction from your people. This is going to be a culture thing. Is everybody on the same page? Does everybody have the energy for this? Does everybody understand where we're going and how we're going to get there? And there needs to be inspiration, confidence, a go-getter. Let's do this, right? Again, it feels a little bit like growth. Governance. Your core of committed board members are ready to do what it takes to restore organizational integrity. We use integrity because we're thinking about the slow decline, where you may have lost market share, you may have lost touch with the community, and you need to get that back. But in a quick decline like COVID, the committed board members are willing to do what's needed to restore the organization to vibrance. Maybe it's not integrity, maybe it's vibrance. But you're probably going to need to rely on your board again for a little more engagement, a little more boots on the ground than you did during the maturity phase. Willingness to cut expenses to reflect income and cash flow. So a willingness to be creative and to be realistic at that point, based on what's happened. So this may be ringing many, many bells. Existing policies and procedures may be too complex, right? We need to be nimble, we need to be agile if we're going to come back. And so probably we don't have to send that paper form through 4 signatures. Let's have a dual signature approach, and let's do it via email. Okay, there are just different examples of ways that you could shorten up your systems to be more appropriate to a growth or a turnaround turning organization. Challenges: finding that leader, finding somebody with the vision and the energy and the communication skills and the patience for changing organizational culture to be able to lead you through that turnaround. This is the case, the COVID case, the quick decline because of COVID, is where I'll take back my statement earlier, or change the statement that the person who was with you through decline is not necessarily your turnaround leader. Because even in the specific organization that I'm thinking of, when I said they didn't have a decline, they had COVID and they just had to shut their doors because the kind of organization that they were, their leader is perfectly prepped and perfectly energized to take them through the turnaround, turned and back into growth. And she was ready to do that, and her team was ready to follow her. So it's establishing that turnaround culture and mindset. And that takes a lot of team communication with both the board team and the staff team, and probably volunteers and donors, right? Getting lot of communication. This is where we are. This is where we're going. This is how we're going to do it. This is where we are today. This is what we're doing tomorrow, that kind of thing. Being committed to consistently frank and open dialogue. There we are, back to communication, all about it. With your constituents, your funders, and your community. And notice funders, right? You know, the funders went through COVID too. And it affected every single individual and every single organization differently. We all know that, we can acknowledge that. And so it's important to just go ahead and lay that on the table to a funder when you're communicating capacity needs and saying, sure, we hit to the point where we need to do some turnaround. And it's not by fault of ours. We're going to be resilient. And this is what we need in the way of funding, consulting, partnerships, a board, a staff, whoever you're communicating to. This is what we need in order to be resilient. Cutting expenditures to reflect realistic income, restoring any eroded community credibility through consistency, honesty, and program results. Again, if the decline was COVID and it was quick and outside the hands of the organization, then it may not be the credibility that it's eroded, but it may be the knowledge or awareness of what you're doing now, or that you're even open, that's eroded. And so back to communication. There's a lot of communication that happens at this phase with all constituents, funders, everyone. And there are consultants that specialize in turnaround. But I also have faith that with this life cycles book and with frank and honest dialogue with the people that make up your different teams, that you could handle some organizational turnaround in your own teams. And finally, terminal. This is when an organization has lost its will, reason, or energy to exist. It happens for all kinds of reasons, and no judgment. It happens. So programs are unreliable, unsteady, or seriously underfunded. Something's happened to the programs. They're just not there anymore. Staff and management have dwindled. Sometimes people are working without pay, or they're being paid for 20 hours, they're working for 40. Bad sign, very bad sign. The board's lost its collective drive to continue and may exist in name only. Attendance at meetings is horrible. I've heard it said they just come for the lunch. They don't even listen. They don't read the things. They don't, they've most likely, they're out of money and may be kind of hand to mouth at this point. And systems have been abandoned. Nobody's got time for a system anymore. You're just kind of, day to day at that point. And the challenge of this stage is accepting responsibility to either move into a turnaround or to sunset the organization and say, you know what, we're going to close our doors, but please use my example, do it with dignity, communicate. There's a legacy here. There were people that were served. There were people that served for years on the board, that served as staff members. There were people who were affected as a community, as donors and as constituents or beneficiaries. And there's dignity in that. There's a legacy in that. And so an organization should shut its doors with that dignity and protect that legacy. And there are consultants who do that as well that help organizations do it. But again, your team can do that if that's what you're choosing to do at the moment, is sitting down with a frank and honest conversation about who are the people that we need to communicate with. How do we need to frame this? Who do we need to honor? How do we need to honor the work? And how do we do this in a way that we can all feel good about in the end and say, yes, I was part of that organization, and move on. Resisting the urge to blame others for the terminal situation, because nobody believes you anyway. At that point, it just doesn't work. If you don't communicate well, frankly and honestly, it just makes everybody have egg on their face. Communicating termination plans to clients and making appropriate referrals, not leaving people high and dry, but making sure that everybody that you take care of is taken care of. And closing up shop in an honorable manner, worthy of the care in which the nonprofit was founded. And somebody put a lot of thought and a lot of energy and a lot of love into this thing, a lot of somebody's over the years. And so I hope you feel as I do, that now that you really understand the basics of the life cycle approach and how to use it, and how to kind of what the key indicators are and challenges are for each of the life cycle stages. And so what I'd like to ask you to do now is to take your life cycle capacity. Ooh, my camera doesn't want to, guess I have to have it by my face. Life cycle capacity placement document. There you go. Hillary's helping us out. Take a look at that and just take a few minutes right now with your, if you need a prompt, you can use the yellow pages, or I have the yellow pages, I mean those gold pages in the middle of your book. That's your, like I keep calling your cheat sheet. I also have a slide I can have up on the screen that will help. So this isn't beautiful, but it's super condensed and short, but this kind of also gives an indicator of different stages. So if you would, just take a minute to chart your first impressions of your organization's life cycle capacity placement. Now, what I'd like for you to do is, as you place each one of those, or as you look at what you've placed, think about what evidence you came to mind that made you put the placement there. So, for example, if you put your organization programs in maturity, was it because you feel like you have a reputation in the community? Was it because you feel like they're well established? What was the evidence that you used to come to that conclusion? And the reason why I ask you that is I want you to get into that habit of thinking in your diagnostic phase. When you are trying to decide what part of your organization is in what part on the life cycle stages, go through your brain, and the evidence is, or as evidenced by, or because we blank. It's very helpful. You know, we talked about how simple this tool is, and it's so helpful to have even one piece of evidence that was really what definitively told you that's where we are. So my board is in the growth stage because we don't really have a lot of structure. That's what we're doing right now. Our finances are in decline. We're real budget heavy, and we've got fixed expenses we need to take a look at. You see what I did? And so please have in mind just one piece of evidence that you feel is definitive every time you put a dot on your chart. Everybody have a pictorial record. Boy, I got stuck on that word tonight. Rendering. Does everybody have a picture of their capacity table? Want to hold those up? See, okay, I see a fat leg and a skinny leg, and okay. Okay. Good job. Good job. And again, it seems simple, but you know, the whole picture is worth 1,000 words thing. And you know, being able to share that or just relate that to other people. It's also an interesting thing, just like Aaron was talking about different people's perceptions of where the organization is. One, you could just have as a little tiny piece of a board meeting or a little tiny piece of a staff retreat or staff meeting, just explain the capacity table and then have everybody draw yours and compare tables and why does everybody think that way. So It's just another way to verbally depict the diagnosis or the current state of the organization. And, you know, I've seen some that are crazy, right? That have a leg missing, or that have a broken flower pot sitting on top because something's going astray with the mission. And so it's just a kind of a simple but powerful and effective way to depict where the organization is capacity-wise. Not necessarily something you'd include in a grant, but it is something that you could use to communicate internally, I would think, primarily. At the bottom of that worksheet is the programs are tabletop, and then the 4 table legs with strengths and opportunities as sections underneath. And so I just want to, while it's fresh in your head, because you've been doing this analysis, I want to invite you to take again another 5 minutes and just go ahead and what are your strengths in your programs? But what are some opportunities for some things or some challenges that you face that you could take advantage of doing all the way through with the management governance, the business model, and the systems. So take a minute to fill that part out, and then please speak up if you have questions or there's some piece of this that you want to share while we're doing this exercise. Is everybody able to come up with some strengths and some opportunities for each area? And part of this you shared in your as evidenced by, right? Or in your description of why you felt that your organization was in a certain place. It came naturally as you described your life cycle stage maybe at a certain table leg, you would say, and so we need to, or pardon me, we've really had this blank happen. And so you've described your challenges, you've described your opportunities. or I heard, well, we had plenty of funding in this area, or you described some strengths as well. But so what this table then is a way to communicate, right? Again, a simple, if you organized information in that way, you could have an intelligent conversation with a potential major donor who said, I want to give to the organization. What do you all need? If I had $25,000 to give an organization and they could show me that in these pieces of their organization, this is where they were strong, but this is where they had opportunities for growth or change, I would be like, fantastic, you know that, right? And so this is a great conversation piece. Also, kind of like Erin referred to earlier with the analysis of life cycle stage, this is a good way to see where people are on the same page and they aren't, right? Especially if somebody thinks something's a strength and somebody thinks the same thing is an opportunity or a challenge. And so this is another exercise to do with a team. And I call boards teams too, right? If we want them to be engaged, we need to talk about them as if and treat them as if they are our team members. And so this is is your board in touch enough to even do this worksheet? That's an interesting question. Are they so engaged that if you said, here's a capacity table, now do you know enough about our organization to draw one? If you already know the answer is no, then no, don't shame them, right? Don't do it before you bring them up to speed and try to get them engaged. But maybe, even if you're doing an engagement strategy with the board and they say, yeah, we all want to be more engaged, we want to know more about the organization, and say, well, this is going to be our final exam. We're gonna talk about the organization together, and I'm going to bring you up to speed on where we are, and then we're all going to do this together and talk about it so that we can see where we are as an organization. So this works with communicating with all different constituencies. Let's talk about a potential partner. So let's say that Brenda and I are executive directors of 2 different organizations and we're thinking about working together. And I say, hey, do you use a life cycles approach? Yeah, we do too. Okay, well, just as a thought partner kind of way to get the conversation rolling about our collaboration, what if we each brought our capacity table and our areas of strength and opportunities? Because maybe we just look at that and find some ways that we could complement each other. Or maybe we'd find some red flags of things that we needed to solve that we're both weak in before we get together and start down this road. So again, simple tools, easy for everybody to understand. Make sure that it's done on the basis of no judgment, complete transparency and honesty, and a desire to meet community needs rather than any individual's agenda. And as long as you have those as the ground rules, then these become good communication tools at every step. Any questions or comments about this particular worksheet? And you have these electronically because I sent them with the Zoom link. Okay, so you can use them over and over. They're all licensed. Somebody paid for your registration here today, and so you have license to use that. And last but certainly not least is one that looks a little different and is branded a little differently too, because this one says Nonprofit Lead at Marietta College. This is what I was using before I even was educated in the life cycles approach. And so you'll see that my capacity focus areas are different than the table legs, but that they really what I had done is kind of break down the systems table leg into a couple of different systems that I saw as key systems. We're not going to do anything with this particular form here and now today, but I wanted you to have it for a couple different reasons. One is I've used this with organizations for years, and it does speak to some people, especially the side that lists capacity development focus areas. And being able to break your table legs down into some specific pieces for people that they can recognize and acknowledge might help those conversations and assessments. It also might help with planning and prioritizing. And then notice that I also on my form had strengths and opportunities, but I also had some threats and weaknesses because I was recognizing that these are internal and these are external to the organization. I think that frame of what's happening internally to our organization versus what's happening externally to our organization is a valid conversation starter. And a good, if you are sitting down at a board retreat or a staff retreat or doing some strategic or tactical planning with your organization, those are good questions to ask, right? So it's a good place to start to see where do people agree. So I think I sent this to you as a Word document, meaning that you can go in and change it, right? So I'm literally giving you license. You can remove, it's blurry. You can remove this if you want to. You put your own logo here if you want to use it for a big strategic planning retreat. You can change these to be the areas that you want to work on. You can give this form to everybody in the room and you can have them share. And then you put them up on the whiteboard and you know what sticker voting is, or if it's a whiteboard, they can tally or check vote. And you can see where people's energy, thoughts, focus, or concentration are right now. And so you could get yourself down to 3 to 5 major areas where you're going to focus your resources during the next year. So this is a form that can be used internally very, very well. It's a little bit too much, I would say, for an external conversation because it has so many different pieces. I would use the one previous that just had the overall table or just strengths and weaknesses of our table legs to, if I was going to talk with somebody on an external basis, with the exception of a consultant that already understood the life cycles approach or had really you felt comfortable with, had the time and the capacity to listen to what your organization was going through, then this could be a valuable tool to use in that consulting relationship as well. But for the most part, I would use that tool internally. Questions about that final worksheet or tool? Okay, so I like, I hate to be like, okay, and it's 11:59, bye. I want to leave some time for overall questions, for reflections, for appreciations, anything that you would like to share or ask or reflect on right now. I think we've got about 10 minutes to do it. And so I want to invite you to have the floor as you see fit. Then I'm just going to say thank you. Thank you all so much. You see how universal this is to anyone in the nonprofit sector. And so I admit when I threw this out there, I thought, oh, there's going to be 30, 40 people on this call. I could not believe what a small group we had, but wow, I mean, what a strong group we had. Every single one of you really showed an understanding for the model and the ability to use it in your organizations. And I just want to say, Hillary and I are both here at our respective organizations, and we refer back to one another. If you email the wrong one, we'll just say that's for her.